A riding crop cuts the air inside a lavish ballroom in New Orleans, and that sound changes everything. The elegant gala becomes the stage for a public humiliation when a powerful real estate mogul raises his hand against his own wife, never imagining that this night will mark the beginning of his downfall. She, Valerie Hayes, is no ordinary victim, but the woman who will transform her pain into the strength to bring down his entire empire. What follows is a story of pride, guilt, and redemption, where power comes face to face with justice. Believe me, you won't be able to imagine the end until you live this story with us. Under the crystal chandeliers of the Roosevelt Hotel, the laughter of the powerful sounds like an empty symphony. No one imagines that tonight, a pregnant woman will shatter the gilded silence of New Orleans. The grand ballroom glows, waiters move between tables, adorned with white magnolias, glasses clink, gowns shimmer like waves on the shore. Valerie Hayes, in a sapphire blue dress that attempts to conceal her pregnancy, walks slowly, clutching a small handbag. Each step feels like an effort to maintain her dignity. She thinks of the promise her husband whispered to her that morning. "Tonight, I won't leave you alone." She glances around, but he is not by her side. Adrian Davenport, a revered developer and the host of the charity gala, smiles among financiers and city council members. His deep voice blends with the smooth jazz drifting in from the courtyard. At his right is Lucia Thorne, his young, ambitious assistant, dressed in crimson, radiant, and self-assured. People watch them, murmuring. A photographer asks for a picture. Lucia leans into Adrian's arm, and the flash illuminates their closeness. Valerie, standing a few yards away, feels the sting of something she doesn't want to name. She takes a sip of water. She smells the magnolias, trying to convince herself she is just tired. An older woman approaches, commenting on how beautiful the evening is, how excellent the champagne is, how New Orleans seems suspended in a dream. Valerie smiles politely, but her gaze drifts to the center of the room, where her husband is talking with Lucia as if the rest of the world has disappeared. The clock strikes 10:30 p.m. The master of ceremonies announces the start of the luxury auction. Valerie feels a wave of dizziness. She approaches Adrian and whispers softly, "Adrian, I'm feeling a little faint. Could we sit in the courtyard for a moment?" Lucia steps forward, smiling with precise politeness, and answers for him, "Mr. Davenport, perhaps Mrs. Davenport isn't accustomed to this kind of event. Poor thing, it must be exhaustion." The words "poor thing" cut through the air. A few guests turn their heads. A tense silence falls. Adrian looks at his wife with a mixture of annoyance and embarrassment, muttering under his breath, "Valerie, don't make a scene, please." She takes a deep breath, trying not to cry. She feels the baby move inside her, like a warning. Lucia lowers her voice, looking at Adrian with feigned sweetness. "Don't speak to her like that. She doesn't deserve your anger, she's just nervous." Then she brings a hand to her chest, sighs, and from her perfectly made-up eyes, a few fake tears slide down. The gesture is so calculated that even a passing waiter pauses for a second. The whispers begin. What an awkward situation. That poor girl, the developer's wife. Adrian feels the floor shift beneath him. His name is being mixed with whispers and pity. In his head, he hears only one thought. "I can't look weak. I can't lose control." His jaw tightens. His voice rises half a tone. "Valerie, please, compose yourself. Everyone is watching us." She answers quietly. "I just want to sit down for a moment. That's all." Lucia, with the precision of someone who measures every word, intervenes again. "Don't worry, Adrian. I'm fine, really. I don't want her to feel bad on my account." She pretends to wipe away a tear, leaning on his shoulder. The scene looks like a portrait of false piety. Valerie stands frozen. She feels the heat of their stares, a bitter taste in her mouth. The music seems to stop. Even the jazz trio falls silent. Inside, something breaks. It's not rage or shame. It's the certainty that her voice no longer matters. A man in the back comments under his breath, "My lord, what a tragedy." The air in the ballroom thickens. Adrian, dominated by his discomfort, tries to smile, but the smile dies before it's born. He sees Lucia's handkerchief, her damp eyes, and he thinks he sees in them a reproach, a victim who needs defending. In that instant, his pride weighs more than his love. He turns to Valerie, his tone cold, his gaze hard. "You're embarrassing me, and you don't even realize it." Valerie feels her heart pounding in her throat. The tears she had been holding back escape. Her breathing becomes shallow. The room spins slightly. Still, she takes a step back. She refuses to fall. Lucia moves forward a little, gripping Adrian's arm with a protective gesture, and says just loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't be angry with her, Adrian. She doesn't mean it." The false compassion awakens the shame of the onlookers. Some look down, others wait for the next move. Adrian feels the blood burn in his temples, the sound of his name among the guests, the rumor of whispers, the feeling of being judged. And inside that pressure, the inner voice tells him he must impose order. Valerie tries to get closer, wanting to speak in his ear, but he backs away. Lucia, her voice trembling, adds, "Please, don't worry about me. I just want things to calm down." Her performance is perfect. The entire room seems to believe her. Valerie watches the scene as if it's not her life, but a slow-motion film. She hears the clink of a glass falling to the floor, a waiter's brief shout of apology. She feels an ancient weariness, the same one her mother carried on her shoulders when she used to say that staying silent was better than arguing. The music returns timidly. Someone plays a soft chord on the piano. Valerie tries to speak again, but Adrian raises his hand, a gesture, not seeking contact but distance. "Please, that's enough. We've had enough of a spectacle." Lucia, again, lets a single tear fall. People sigh. In that moment, the murmur of the ballroom becomes an echo that Valerie can't comprehend. She hears disjointed phrases, nervous laughter, the whispers of those pretending not to look. She realizes she can't stay there, that she can't breathe. She decides to go to the courtyard, though her legs tremble. As she walks toward the door, she feels the stairs on her back, the cocktail glasses pausing mid-air, the scent of expensive bourbon and perfume. She reaches the edge of the ballroom, stops for a second, and looks back. Adrian is holding his glass, Lucia by his side, her white handkerchief stained with false tears. The air seems frozen. Valerie wants to believe it's all a misunderstanding, that they can talk the next day, but inside her, something extinguishes. She crosses the threshold, and the courtyard air hits her face, a mixture of jasmine and the cool night. She breathes with difficulty, leaning against the wall. Behind her, she hears applause. A voice announces the next item for auction. A braided leather riding crop from a legendary Kentucky estate, a symbol of equestrian tradition. She doesn't know it, but that object will soon bear witness to her fall. She remains for a few seconds under the open sky, a hand on her belly, her heart trying not to break. Inside, Lucia lifts her face to the chandelier. The golden light caresses her profile, and a brief, icy smile crosses her lips. She whispers to Adrian, "Don't you know this will be the last night she is your wife?" The sound of the jazz piano continues to pulse, but between the music and the champagne, Adrian Davenport's fury is about to freeze New Orleans. The echo of what happened minutes ago lingers like a shard of glass. The room remembers Lucia's flawless tear, her velvet words in front of the guests, and the whisper she left Valerie with at the courtyard entrance, a dark omen. The image replays in Adrian's mind, pushing him to an edge where pride rules, calm dies, and his name is everything. The master of ceremonies raises his voice with forced cheer. "Ladies and gentlemen, item number 11, an artisan-crafted riding crop from a Kentucky Derby champion's estate, braided leather, silver rivets, a symbol of a century-old tradition." A spotlight hits the auction table. The leather gleams as if it's breathing. Its curved shadow falls across the white linen. Some applaud out of inertia, others lean in for a better look. The photographer adjusts his lens. A waiter freezes with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. No one knows that the night is one heartbeat away from shattering. Valerie returns from the courtyard, her face pale, one hand on her belly, the other on the back of a chair. She tries to find her husband, to ask for 5 minutes of air. Her voice comes out as a near whisper, "Adrian, please, let's talk for a moment." But the words fall without an echo. The developer's eyes aren't on his wife, they're on the room, which is whispering with an appetite that wounds him. They're on Lucia, just a step away. Her handkerchief still damp, her face a mask of fragile beauty. They're on the riding crop, consecrated by the spotlight. And in that triangle, his judgment clouds, his blood boils, his pride charges like an invisible bull. The auctioneer tries to joke about Southern tradition and the art of leatherworking. Few people laugh, the murmur grows. Valerie repeats in a gentle voice, "I'm dizzy. If we could just sit down." Lucia leans in delicately, her perfect diction floating over their heads. "Don't worry about me, Adrian. I'm fine. It just saddens me to see her so overwrought." So overwrought. The words land like a public branding, and for Adrian, that brand sears the back of his neck. He takes a decisive step, his heel striking the marble floor. He approaches the table, places his hand on the braided leather, and lifts it. The crop carves a dark arc in the air, a brief snap that hits nothing yet, but divides the room. The air thins. Valerie reaches out an instinctive arm. She doesn't touch the handle, but the sleeve of her husband's jacket a plea. "Don't," she whispers. "We have a child inside us." Another spark of shame ignites in Adrian. He feels she is demanding tenderness in front of witnesses, pushing him to yield, that his family name is being dismantled. He hesitates. He turns his face to the crowd and, with an icy calm, pronounces, "If you wanted a show, you're going to get one." The first strike comes without warning. It whistles, cutting the air with an animalistic sound, and lands askew on Valerie's shoulder. There is no blood, but the sharp crack of the blow makes 2 or 3 guests let out a soft, "Oh, The piano stops without being told. Glasses vibrate with a thin hum. The humiliation enters like a dull knife, wounding deeper than the skin. Valerie doubles over, her hand flying to her belly with absolute maternal instinct. A brief whimper cuts through the dead music. She tries to straighten up, sees spots of light, hears a fan snapping shut in anger. Her throat is raw. "Adrian," she says, but his name offers no refuge. Lucia, a half step away, arches her eyebrows with porcelain pain. Her handkerchief rises again like a white wing, and someone murmurs, "What a disgrace," without clarifying for whom. Adrian tightens his fingers on the handle. He feels the leather obey him like a certainty. He sees heads huddled together, lips pressed tight, phone lenses half raised. He senses the cavern of public opinion, the judgment without a judge, the story being written for the morning papers. The second blow comes lower, faster. The crop whistles again. It doesn't tear the dress. It barely bites it, leaving a trail of fear. And the fear grows. It runs into the corners, climbs the chandeliers, descends the marble columns, and settles on the table of the city's elite. One guest covers her mouth, another clutches her purse. A waiter takes a step forward and stops. The master of ceremonies consults a technician, not knowing what to say. And Valerie, her eyes hot and her forehead cold, thinks, "Breathe for him." She tries to say it, but only a thread of a voice emerges. "Please." Adrian doesn't hear her plea. He hears his name on the lips of others. He hears the business community breathing down his neck. He hears the city judging him. He hears Lucia's fake sob as she now lowers her gaze like a sad saint. And the third strike arrives with a sharper hiss. It grazes a fold of her dress, leaving a line of heat that doesn't mark the skin but sears the memory. And in that second, memory photographs the exact position of every guest. The trembling fingers, the pursed lips, the millimeter distance of Lucia from the man she claims to be protecting. Valerie stumbles back, tripping on the edge of a rug. A glass falls from a table, spilling red wine like a stain that points without naming names. The room sounds of tiny crystals breaking from within. She swallows, nausea rising. Her world tilts. She looks for a chair, not wanting to sit down. She knows that to sit would be to disappear. She thinks of home, of her mother's voice, of the smell of coffee and beignets, of the forgiving morning light. She feels a low blow in her belly that isn't the crop, it's the fear of inheriting fear. "We'll talk tomorrow," she says, trying to build a bridge. But Adrian, his face taut and his eyes like stone, goes for a fourth strike. His hand traces the mechanical arc of a man who believes he is obligated not to yield. The leather rises, the leather falls, and in that second, from the back of the room, a deep, clean voice cuts through like lightning without thunder. "That's enough, Davenport." The arm freezes. The crop hangs like a defeated animal. The room breathes. Heads turn. The spotlight finds a tall man with discreet graying temples, a sober bow tie, and a confident stride. James Alcott crosses the aisle of attention, not with haste, but with moral authority. He offers an open hand, takes the handle not snatching it, but collecting it, and places it back on the table with a firm gesture that sounds like a final punctuation. "No man has the right to turn his wife into a spectacle," he says, without shouting. And the word spectacle suddenly makes the onlookers shrink. A woman sits down. A young man lowers his phone. The photographer finds himself with his camera hanging like a guilty weight. Adrian looks at James with a hatred that doesn't quite ignite. "This is my business," he says, and the words fall onto the marble like a misplaced glass. James replies, "No. This is a matter of dignity." And 2 or 3 consciences stand up from within. Valerie folds in on herself. Her vision blurs. The world loses focus. A wave of dizziness pushes her. James extends his arm, and she leans on it. A waitress brings water. Another offers a chair. Those who were spectators moments ago now want to be saviors, but they are too late. Lucia takes her final actress's step. She positions herself beside Adrian with her purest profile, her wet eyes on display, her mouth trembling, her handkerchief now dry. And that feigned purity reels in compassion, like someone collecting coins from the floor. Valerie takes a sip of water. The cold glass brings back her pulse. Her lips stammer, "Thank you." "Breathe," James whispers. "It's over now." And those words, "It's over now," push a crack of light into her darkness. The master of ceremonies clears his throat and announces that the auction will continue in the courtyard, if everyone pleases. No one applauds. Some chairs scrape. Suits head for the doors. Heels sketch out an uncomfortable present. The chandelier once again shines too brightly. The magnolias now smell like a mask. Adrian reaches for the crop as if a magnet is pulling it, but he doesn't take it. Lucia tries to touch his shoulder. He doesn't look at her. His jaw vibrates with a primal resentment. His eyes search for a place to hide. He can't find one. James maintains the posture of someone who doesn't abandon a victim halfway. Valerie tries to stand tall. She succeeds. She feels the weight of every gaze, and yet there is a seed of calm that is not yet forgiveness. It is dignity, breathing. The exit opens. 6 feet of marble hallway separate her from the cool night air. The riding crop, lying on the tablecloth, looks like a sleeping serpent. Its shine is an offense. Its silence is an accusation. The rumor reassembles into hushed conversations. Someone pretends nothing happened. Another comments it was a misunderstanding. A third person calls for a car. A fourth says, "Poor thing. No one knows if they're talking about the right one." Valerie takes a step. James accompanies her. The eyes of half the room fall to the floor. The rest watch over their shoulders to convince themselves it's not their problem. And then, very close, so low it almost reaches nowhere, Lucia leans in, tilts her face, and lets a phrase fall like a signature etched in marble. Every empire's fall begins with a single fake tear. Dawn arrives in the garden district with a thick silence, a silence that smells of fresh coffee and dry shame. The streets are still asleep. On the wrought iron balconies, hanging ferns tremble in the first breeze from the river. Valerie walks slowly down a quiet street, heels in her hand, her bare feet cold on the slate sidewalk. The blue dress, the same one from last night, now seems like a broken memory. The wrinkled fabric holds the scent of bourbon, of fear, and of something she can't name. Beside her, James Alcott walks without speaking, his face tense and his eyes tired, carrying a jacket he offered her to cover her shoulders. "You'll be safe here," he murmurs as they arrive at the home of Teresa Hayes, Valerie's mother, a white house with red geraniums in the window boxes. The door opens before they can knock, and Teresa appears, her apron still on, her hands wet from washing dishes. Her gaze travels from her daughter's pale face to the man accompanying her, and in a second, she understands more than anyone has said. "My child, my God," she whispers, wrapping her in a hug that smells of soap and fresh toast. Valerie collapses into that embrace like someone finding solid ground. Inside, the kitchen has the same familiar order: a small table, 2 chairs, a radio playing softly, a skillet with warm oil on the stove. Teresa pours a coffee, sets it in front of her daughter, and sits down without a word. The clock on the wall reads 8:30 a.m., and the sun begins to paint the tiles in gold. Valerie tries to speak, but the words get stuck. What she lived through last night has no simple name. Teresa, without waiting for an explanation, caresses her cheek. "You don't have to say anything, I already know." James, standing by the window, watches the shadows in the courtyard. His presence is imposing without effort, but his gaze holds the weight of someone who has seen too much. "Mrs. Hayes," he says respectfully, "what happened last night can't be left like this." Teresa nods, but her voice sounds weary. "Here, family matters are handled with patience, not with noise." James turns, his eyes meeting Valerie's. "This isn't about noise, it's about justice." She looks away, the coffee growing cold in her hands. For a moment, the silence is filled with memories. The little girl who played in this same courtyard, the summer's smelling of jasmine, Adrian's laughter when he was still a kind young man who promised her the world. Teresa sighs. "He was always proud, but you chose not to see it too." Valerie feels the sting of truth and replies in a thread of a voice, "I thought love could fix anything." Teresa looks at her for a long moment and says, "Love can't fix what fear feeds." The words land like a soft blow. James breaks the silence, pulling a folded folder from his pocket. "There's something you should know," he says to Valerie, "and it has nothing to do with last night. The folder has been waiting for years. Inside are old documents, yellowed letters, and a black and white photo of a man in a military uniform." "This is your father," James explains. "He served with me many years ago. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be alive today." Valerie looks up bewildered. Teresa nervously clutches her apron. "Your father saved my life in Afghanistan," James continues. "And when he died, he made me promise to look after his family if they ever needed it. Last night, when I saw you, I knew that time had come." Valerie sits motionless, her mind tangled between past and present. Teresa bows her head, silent tears running down her cheeks. For years, she had kept this connection secret. "I never wanted you to live looking backward," the mother says, "but it seems the past has come to call on us again." Valerie touches the photo. The man's gaze is both familiar and distant. "I don't know what to do," she murmurs. "I don't know if I want to remember." James sits across from her, his voice firm but gentle. "Remembering is the only way to not repeat." Outside, children play in the street. A neighbor waters her plants, humming a blues tune. Life goes on, indifferent, while inside the kitchen, a new course is being set. Teresa breaks a piece of bread, wipes her tears, and says, "You're going to stay here for a while, darling. No one will touch you as long as I'm breathing." James nods, stands, and leaves a business card on the table. "I have a contact in New York, a friend who runs a support center for women. I can help you start over." Valerie hesitates. New York sounds like another planet, but something burns in her chest, a mix of shame and a desire to breathe without fear. She looks at her mother and sees, for the first time, the exhaustion of a generation that learned to be silent. "I don't want to be like you, Mom," she says, without reproach. "I don't want to survive by hiding." Teresa smiles sadly. "Then live, my child, and don't look back." The sun streams through the window, bathing the table in a golden glow. Valerie gets up, goes to the courtyard, and looks at the lemon tree her father planted before he died. Its leaves stir in the wind, the scent of lemon and damp earth reminding her that there is still life. James comes over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Your father would be proud of you." She nods, unable to speak. She knows the worst is yet to come, facing the press, the shame, the whispers, the name Davenport echoing through the city. However, for the first time since the night before, she feels something like calm in her chest. It's not forgetfulness, it's resistance. "Thank you," she says softly, "for staying when everyone else left." James replies, "I'm keeping a promise." When he leaves, Teresa and Valerie remain in silence, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade down the street. The mother pours more coffee and says, "Men come and go, but blood remains. Don't forget where you come from." Oh. Valerie looks at the photos on the wall. Her grandparents, her father, her younger mother, herself as a child in a white dress. She understands that her story doesn't end in shame but in the decision to rise. The clock strikes 9:30. A voice on the radio announces the weather: clear skies in New Orleans, with a chance of rain up north. Valerie places her hands on the table and says with a newfound determination, "Tomorrow, I'm going to New York." Teresa doesn't ask any questions. She just takes her hand and says, "Go, my child, the world doesn't end with a last name." Outside, the Mississippi River glitters under the sun like a mirror, and for the first time in a long time, Valerie feels she can look at her reflection without fear. New York City greets her with a new kind of cold, different from New Orleans, a cold that doesn't cut the skin but clears the mind. The train arrives at Penn Station at dawn. The platform is half empty, and Valerie steps off with a small suitcase, her mother's coat over her shoulders, and a letter from James folded in her pocket. The letter contains only an address and a single sentence written in blue ink: "This is where you begin again." Outside, the city awakens amid orange lights, the hiss of buses, the smell of roasted coffee, the murmur of footsteps. Valerie looks up and tells herself that New York doesn't know who she is, and that ignorance is her first gift. She hails a cab. The driver looks at her in the rearview mirror. First time in the Big Apple? She manages a small smile. First time in a long time. The cab moves up 6th Avenue as the sun rises slowly between the skyscrapers. Bakery windows fill with fresh pastries, and a light wind lifts forgotten newspapers. On every corner, Valerie sees people in a hurry: women in colorful scarves, men with briefcases, young people with earbuds. No one looks at her, and she finds the anonymity beautiful. The car stops in front of an old brownstone with a wrought iron stoop. By the door, a discreet sign reads, "Clara's Haven, a center for women." Valerie pays the fare, says thank you in a voice that trembles, and walks up the steps. A woman in her 50s, with gray hair and a neat bun and a warm smile, opens the door before she can ring the bell. "You must be Valerie," she says naturally. "James told me about you." Valerie nods, not knowing what to say. The woman adds, "I'm Clara. Come in, dear. The coffee is always fresh here." The inside smells of toast and calm. On the walls are paintings of landscapes, dried flowers in glass jars, and a chalkboard with phrases written by other women. "I am not afraid." Dignity is not lost, it is reclaimed. Valerie sets her suitcase down, sits, and feels the weight of her body. Clara serves her a mug, sits across from her, and asks without pushing, "Do you want to tell me something? Or would you rather we talk about the weather?" Valerie smiles, a fragile gesture, and replies, "The weather, for now." Clara laughs, a serene laugh without any harmful curiosity. In New York, winter always seems longer than it is, but it passes, just like everything else. The sentence hangs in the air like a balm. A few hours later, Valerie goes up to the small room assigned to her. A simple bed, a window overlooking a small inner garden, a desk with a plant. On the windowsill, a cat is dozing in the sunday. She opens her suitcase and takes out the photo of her father. She places it by the lamp, and in doing so, feels she is founding something, a minimal life, but her own. From the street come the voices of children, the sound of a distant saxophone, the call of a street vendor. Everything seems ordinary, yet for her, it is a victory. She lies down on the bed, looks at the ceiling, and whispers, "You haven't beaten me," without knowing if she's talking to Adrian or to fear itself. The days pass slowly, filled with new routines. At Clara's Haven, mornings begin with workshops, sewing, writing, and shared silence. Valerie learns to listen without feeling judged, to speak without fear of her voice trembling. There are women from everywhere: a woman from Peru who fled a violent husband, a young woman from Appalachia with a 3-year-old son, an older woman from the Bronx who says, "The heart gets used to the blows if you don't teach it to beat again." Each story touches her like a fragmented mirror, and slowly, the pieces of her own begin to fit together. In a notebook Clara gives her, she writes one sentence every night. The first one says, "My body is not a source of shame." The second, "My voice does not need permission." Clara, who observes without interrupting, tells her one day as they serve soup, "When a woman starts to write her own story, she has already won half the battle." Valerie nods, and for the first time since the gala, she feels hungry not just for food, but for life. She starts taking walks through the West Village, buys bread from a local bakery, leaves a tip at a coffee shop, and learns to say thank you, without looking down. One afternoon, in front of an electronics store, she sees a brief news report on TV. Developer Adrian Davenport is under investigation for assault and battery. The image shows the Roosevelt Hotel, the red carpet, the flashes. Her heart pounds in her chest, but she doesn't feel fear, only a clean sadness, like one feels at a necessary funeral. That night, she can't sleep. She goes out to the garden with a blanket over her shoulders. The New York sky has a metallic glow. The stars seem farther away than in New Orleans. Clara appears silently with 2 cups of tea and sits beside her. "I saw the news," she says straightforwardly. Valerie nods. "I don't want him in jail. I want him to understand," she murmurs. Clara replies, "Sometimes understanding is the greatest sentence of all." They sit in silence. The steam from the tea mixes with the cold air. In that quiet, Valerie remembers James's words. Remembering is the only way to not repeat, and she promises herself she won't forget. The next day, she receives a letter. The envelope bears the letterhead of a law firm from Washington, D.C. inside, a brief note. "There are still accounts from the past you should know about." She recognizes James's handwriting and sighs. She knows the path to peace is not over. On her desk, her notebook waits. She writes a new sentence. "I have survived, but I still have to live." She looks out the window. The cat watches her with half-closed eyes, and she smiles. For the first time in a long time, the word hope doesn't sound foreign. Outside, the hum of New York continues on its course, but inside her, the silence has become a refuge. The weeks in New York begin to have a rhythm, a pulse of their own, that Valerie learns to follow like the beat of a new song. Clara's haven has become her sanctuary and her school, a place where time isn't measured by clocks, but by breaths. Every morning smells of fresh bread, coffee with cinnamon, and the soft conversations of women trying to rebuild themselves from the rubble. In the common room, voices mix with the radio. Someone laughs, another cries silently, and Clara, ever steady, says that every tear is also a beginning. Valerie, sitting by the window, writes in her notebook. Fear doesn't disappear, but it learns to sit farther away. The New York winter drags on with gray days. Valerie starts therapy with a young psychologist named Dr. Evans, who speaks with both tenderness and firmness. In their first session, Dr. Evans asks her to close her eyes and breathe. "I don't want you to forget," she says. "I want you to remember without it hurting." Valerie hesitates, but she complies. At first the words won't come, they're trapped in her throat. Then, they emerge in bursts, as if releasing themselves. She talks about the fear, the voiceless nights, the blow that hurt not just her skin but her dignity. Dr. Evans listens, taking few notes, more attentive to her tone than to the facts. "Your voice is tired," she says. "We're going to give it its strength back." That sentence becomes her mantra. Every day, Valerie gets up, looks in the mirror, and repeats softly, "I have the right to speak." At Clara's haven, the afternoons are quieter. The women sew, paint, or simply drink tea. Clara plays classical music and sometimes an old blues record. One of the residents, a woman from Mississippi named Rosalie, teaches Valerie how to clap to the rhythm. "The body talks too," Rosalie says. "If you listen to it, it stops shaking." And so, little by little, Valerie starts to move again. One afternoon, Clara organizes a meeting where everyone is asked to read something they've written. Valerie resists. She says her handwriting is clumsy, that she has nothing to tell. But when her turn comes, she opens her notebook and reads a short sentence. "I lost my voice the day I stopped believing in myself." The room falls silent, and then a soft, respectful applause fills the space. Valerie smiles without knowing why. She feels something inside her settle into place. The following days are spent between walks in Central Park and writing classes. In the park, Valerie stops by the lake and watches the reflection of the bare trees. A little girl runs after a pigeon, her laughter cutting through the air. Valerie closes her eyes, lets the wind caress her face. She no longer feels the same pressure in her chest, though the fear is still there, smaller, more tamed. One morning, she receives an unexpected call. "It's James." "I just wanted to see how you are," his voice says. "Breathing," she answers. He laughs softly. "Sometimes, that's more than enough." He tells her the legal proceedings against Adrian are moving forward, that there are witnesses, that the media's tone has shifted. Valerie thanks him but doesn't ask for more details. She hangs up and stares at the phone. There is no joy, only a weariness that finally seems to make sense. That night, she dreams of the hotel, the sound of the riding crop, the silence of the glasses, Adrian's cold gaze. She wakes with a scream that doesn't escape her lips. She gets up, walks to the window, and opens the blinds. New York is sleeping under the rain. The car lights reflect on the asphalt like serpents of fire. On the fogged glass, she writes with her finger, "I'm still here." She knows it's not a victory, but it's an affirmation. Fear still visits her, but it no longer rules. In mid-March, Clara suggests she join a therapeutic theater workshop. Valerie refuses at first. She's afraid everyone will stare, that her voice will break. But she finally agrees. In the first class, the exercise is to shout your own name. The other women do it without difficulty. When her turn comes, her throat closes up. Dr. Evans, who is also participating, comes over and whispers, "You don't have to shout it loud, it just has to sound true." Valerie takes a deep breath, looks at the floor, and says slowly, "Valerie." The voice trembles, but it doesn't break. The others applaud. Clara smiles from the back and says, "There it is, dear. There's your strength." As the days pass, the theater becomes a ritual. In one scene, she has to act as a woman saying goodbye to her fear. She doesn't need to act. She closes her eyes and imagines leaving behind a hotel full of false lights, a man with clenched fists, and a future that no longer belongs to her. At the end of the session, tears stream down her face, but they are tears of relief, not sadness. In April, flowers begin to fill the parks, and with them comes the news that the trial will be held in New York. Clara finds her in the dining room with the court summons in her hand. "Are you going to go?" she asks. Valerie looks up and answers, "Yes." Her voice doesn't tremble. "This time, I'm not going to be silent." Clara takes her hand and says, "Then you've already won." That night, Valerie sits in front of the mirror and observes herself in silence. Her eyes have dark circles, but they also have light. She puts on some music, a jazz melody that reminds her of the courtyard in New Orleans. She thinks of her mother, of James, of all the women at Clara's Haven, and feels a gratitude that fills her chest. She looks at herself and murmurs, "I'm alive, and that's enough for today." Outside, the city breathes. New York, with its lights and shadows, has adopted her. In the reflection of the glass, she sees a woman who is no longer hiding. And for the first time in a long time, she recognizes herself. Adrian Davenport hasn't slept in weeks. In the empty New Orleans mansion, the echo of his footsteps resounds like a ceaseless judgment. The day's newspapers pile up on his office desk, all featuring his name in headlines that smell of shame. New Orleans developer accused of publicly assaulting pregnant wife. The photos from the hotel, the frozen champagne glasses, the riding crop gleaming under the lights, his own face distorted by rage. In every image he sees himself transformed into the one thing he swore he would never be. He opens a bottle of bourbon not for pleasure, but to silence the voices drilling into his head. From the window, he can see the indifferent Mississippi River, flowing slowly, as if it were carrying away his past along with it. The living room still holds the scent of Lucia's perfume, a trail of sweet florals that now irritates him. She hasn't been back since the night of the scandal, but her shadow remains on the cushions, in the mirrors. Adrian remembers her twisted smile as the press devoured him. He remembers how she cried for the cameras with the perfection of a seasoned actress, claiming she was only trying to separate two people who loved each other. The world believed her. He, on the other hand, was pointed at, judged, and reduced to a monster. He sits down, opens his laptop, and searches his own name. Hundreds of articles, comments, insults. He slams the screen shut and mutters, "It wasn't my fault." But the echo in the room replies, "Yes, it was." That morning his lawyer calls. The voice is dry, blunt. "The preliminary hearing will be in New York." Adrian grits his teeth. "New York," he repeats, his tone a mix of anger and fear. "She's there." Yes," the lawyer confirms, "and she will testify." The ensuing silence is as heavy as lead. Adrian hangs up without saying goodbye, stands, and walks to a mirror. His face is puffy, his eyes are shadowed, his shirt is wrinkled. For the first time in years, he doesn't recognize himself. "They took everything from me," he tells himself, but deep down, he knows he lost it all himself. He decides to travel to the city a few days before the hearing. He takes the afternoon train, the car nearly empty. Outside, the Louisiana landscape blurs past like a mirage. The sun sinks behind the cypress trees. In his briefcase, he carries documents, clothes, and a letter he never sent, an apology written with words he isn't sure he believes. In the train car, a little girl plays with her mother. Adrian watches them out of the corner of his eye. The sound of her laughter ties a knot in his throat. He thinks of the child he could have had, the one he might never have. He closes his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, he feels true fear, not fear of the law, but of facing Valerie. He arrives in New York at night. The air is colder, heavier. He takes a cab to his hotel and passes the illuminated courthouse, which looks like a cathedral. The driver, an older man, tries to make conversation. "Business?" Adrian nods vaguely. He can't bring himself to say he's here to face the wreckage of his life. At the hotel, the receptionist recognizes him and gives him a fleeting glance. "Welcome, Mr. Davenport," she says with professional courtesy, but her eyes hold a mix of curiosity and pity. He signs in, takes the elevator up, enters his room, and collapses onto the bed. The TV is on the news channel. They're talking about a domestic violence case. Another similar story. He changes the channel, but the theme follows him as if the universe is reflecting back what he denied. The next morning he receives a text from an unknown number. "You can't hide from what you did." He deletes it without replying, though the words burn. He goes for a walk downtown, passing through Times Square, watching people go in and out of shops, couples kissing without a care. Everything seems normal, except him. He crosses Broadway and stops in front of an electronics store where a TV is showing news about his upcoming hearing. His name appears next to Valerie Hayes. The image of her entering Clara's Haven paralyzes him. She doesn't look like the same woman. There is strength in her gaze, calm in her posture. He feels a strange mix of pride and rage. "So," he mutters, "she's not afraid of me anymore." That night, returning to his hotel, Lucia is waiting for him. She's in the lobby, impeccable, in a wool coat and red lipstick. He stops, surprised. "What are you doing here?" he asks. She smiles. "I came to help you, Adrian." He scowls. "Help me." "You." "We need to talk," she says, stepping into the elevator without waiting for a reply. In the room, Lucia removes her gloves and sits in an armchair. "They're destroying you," she begins. "And you pushed me over the edge," he retorts. Lucia looks at him without blinking. "I warned you Valerie was weak, and now she's ruined you. I can fix your image, but I need something in return." He stares at her, incredulous. "In return for what?" "For you to give me back what's mine, my position, my money, my place." Adrian laughs without humor. "There's no place left for anyone." Lucia stands, approaches him, and whispers, "Then you'll sink alone." She leaves, her perfume lingering in the air. Adrian drinks straight from the bottle, his mind spinning. He looks at the letter on the desk, opens it, and reads it one more time. "I'm sorry, Valerie. I didn't know how to be the man I promised I would be." He folds it and puts it in his pocket. Deep down, he knows no apology will be enough, but he also knows that staying silent would be worse. He looks out the window at the city, illuminated like a board of fire, and feels the weight of the approaching judgment. There is no clean repentance in his chest, only a dirty mix of guilt and the need for control. Still, something has changed. For the first time, he isn't looking for justification, but for understanding. The next morning, before dawn, Adrian leaves the hotel and walks to the Brooklyn Bridge. The sky is beginning to lighten, the air cutting like glass. He sits on a bench overlooking the water, which reflects the red of the sunrise. He closes his eyes and murmurs in the silence, "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I have to try." He expects no answer. Only the wind responds, rustling through the nearby trees. He stays there until the sun touches his face. Then he stands, adjusts his jacket, and tells himself, "Tomorrow, I will finally speak." But deep down, he knows it won't just be before a judge, but before the only person who can grant or forever take away the last shadow of humanity he has left. The New York County Courthouse was surrounded by journalists at dawn. Cameras waited before the sun was up, the cold lights of the flashes cutting through the crisp April air. At the entrance, a line of women stood in silent observation, some holding small signs that read, "No more." Valerie arrived flanked by James and Clara, dressed in a light gray coat, her hair in a low bun. She walked without looking at the reporters, her head held high and her steps firm. Each click of a camera sounded like an echo of the past, but this time, she didn't tremble. Inside the building, the marble lobby echoed with the sound of heels and the murmur of lawyers. In the main courtroom, the judge was already seated, the microphones on, the files open. On the other side, Adrian Davenport waited, his face tense, his suit immaculate, trying to maintain his composure as the world watched. The judge announced the start of the hearing. His voice resonated in the room. Case of the state versus Davenport. The defendant is accused of assault and domestic battery. Valerie took a deep breath. She remembered Clara's words that morning. "Don't shout to be heard. Speak to be believed." Across from her, Adrian avoided her gaze. For the first few minutes, the defense attorney tried to spin a version where everything had been a misunderstanding, a marital dispute exaggerated by the media. The words sounded hollow. In the gallery, some people shook their heads in disbelief. The prosecutor stood, laying out the evidence, photographs, testimonies, and the video captured by a guest, which clearly showed Adrian's hand raising the riding crop. A heavy silence fell. Valerie felt the air thicken. On the screen, her own image appeared, her bowed head, the blue dress, the look of fear. She closed her eyes for a moment, then forced herself to watch, not out of morbidity, but for the sake of justice. Adrian looked down, his jaw clenched, his hands clasped violently. When the judge asked for his statement, he rose with visible effort. "Your Honor," he began, "that night was not as it's being described. I lost control. I didn't mean to hurt her." The judge interrupted him. "But you did hurt her." Adrian swallowed hard. "Yes, I did. Lucia told me that Valerie was trying to humiliate me. I was blinded by rage." Lucia's name hung in the air like a poison. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "Are you blaming a third party for your violent conduct?" Adrian shook his head, his eyes moist. "No, I blame myself. But she knew how to use my pride against me." Valerie watched him without moving. There was no hatred in her gaze, only an infinite distance. The judge asked her to speak. She rose slowly. Her voice trembled at first, but then grew steady. "I am not here for revenge, Your Honor. I am here for the truth. What happened that night was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was the result of years of fear, of silence, and of shame. And today, I am not here to ask for punishment. I am here to ask for respect." The entire room listened in absolute silence. From the second row, Clara watched her with tears in her eyes. The prosecutor requested permission to call an additional witness, James Alcott. When he entered the courtroom, the murmuring grew. Some recognized him as a prominent businessman. The judge asked him to testify. James spoke with serenity. "I was there. I saw what happened, but I'm not here just as a witness. I am here because this man," he said, pointing to Adrian, "is the product of a system that taught us for years to stay silent, and because Valerie's father, a man I knew in the service, saved my life. And he asked one thing of me, to protect his daughter's dignity, if the world ever made her doubt her own worth. Oh well. The courtroom was stunned into silence. Adrian looked up, surprised. "What are you saying?" James looked him directly in the eyes. "That your victim is the daughter of a hero you could never have looked in the eye if he were alive today." The words were like a shattered mirror. The color drained from Adrian's face, and he sank back into his chair. Valerie, bewildered, looked at James, who gave her a sad smile. "Your father is watching," he seemed to say, "and today you are keeping his promise." The judge called for order. The moment stretched on. Adrian asked for permission to speak one last time. "I just want to apologize," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Valerie, but I need to say it." She looked at him for the first time during the entire hearing. "Don't look for my forgiveness," she replied calmly. "Look for your own." The judge called a recess. In the hallway, reporters swarmed, but Valerie didn't speak. She went out to an inner courtyard where the air smelled of rain. James caught up with her and offered a bottle of water. "You were braver than any man I've ever known," he told her. She gave a faint smile. "I don't feel brave, just tired." "Tired is also a form of victory," he replied. When the hearing resumed, the judge announced the preliminary verdict, and the process continued its course. Adrian didn't speak again. His face had become an empty mask. Outside, the women from the No More group applauded not with euphoria, but with respect. Clara was waiting for them at the exit with a hug that felt like home. Valerie took a deep breath, looked up at the clear New York sky, and thought of her mother, of New Orleans, of the river that kept flowing even when no one was watching. For the first time, the sound of applause didn't hurt. It was a clean noise, without judgment, without guilt. A sound that resembled freedom. In cell number 12 of a federal correctional facility, the silence is heavier than iron. Adrian Davenport wakes to the first ray of sunlight filtering through the bars. 3 months have passed since the trial. 3 months since he heard his name pronounced alongside the word guilty. The gray walls have no clock, but his body has learned to measure time by the sounds in the hallway. Turning keys, the breakfast cart, the guard's footsteps. In the corner, on a small table, lie a notebook and a sealed envelope. He wrote it days ago but hasn't had the courage to send it. On the envelope, in a trembling hand, is Valerie's name. He gets up, splashes cold water on his face, and sits down. He stares at the paper as if it weighs a ton. Taking a breath, he starts a new letter. "Valerie," he writes, "I don't know if these words deserve to leave this place. I know I hurt you, and no apology can erase that. But there is something I need to say before the silence consumes me." He stops. He remembers her face in the courtroom, the firm calm in her voice when she told him, "Don't look for my forgiveness, look for your own." Those words haunt him like a constant echo. Since then, he has stopped drinking, stopped blaming others. Every night, when the yard is empty, he repeats in his head what he couldn't say out loud. "I failed you because I was afraid." And fear, when it disguises itself as power, destroys everything it touches. At noon, the prison chaplain enters his cell. He is a thin man with a patient smile. "Written anything today?" he asks. Adrian nods, and the chaplain sits beside him. "Don't write to ask for something. Write to understand," he advises. Adrian puts down his pen and sighs. "I don't understand how I got here." "No one falls all at once," the chaplain replies. "You fall step by step, and sometimes prison is the first step up." Adrian smiles for the first time in days. He thinks about the idea of ascending from the fall, as if guilt too could have a ceiling. In the afternoons, he attends a reading workshop. There, he meets men who, like him, live between rage and regret. One of them, an old man with a white beard, tells him, "The punishment doesn't start in here. It starts when you no longer recognize yourself." That sentence strikes him deeply. Adrian begins to read compulsively, books on justice, on redemption, on silence. He discovers there is more strength in humble silence than in proud speech. On one page he finds an underlined line that shakes him. "Forgiveness does not absolve, it transforms." That night, he can't sleep. In another part of New York, Valerie receives an envelope with the prison's postmark. She looks at it without opening it. She has spent weeks trying to live without looking back. Clara's haven is now more than a refuge. It's her home. Clara has encouraged her to coordinate a new project, a center for women with children, a space where no one has to choose between fear and freedom. Valerie accepts, though she still finds it hard to believe she is capable. When she finally opens Adrian's letter, she does so with cold hands. She reads slowly. There are no excuses, only a naked confession. I expect nothing from you, he writes. Only that one day, you might be able to remember my name without pain. Valerie places the letter on the table, looks at it for a long time, and then folds it carefully. She doesn't cry, but a knot in her throat loosens. She doesn't feel pity, she feels closure. That night, while the other women are having dinner, she goes out to the center's garden. The air smells of rain and damp earth. She looks up at the starless sky and realizes that forgiveness isn't a gift you give, but a door you open for yourself. She murmurs softly, I forgive you, but not for you, for me. Clara watches her from the window with a silent smile. In prison, Adrian finishes his 10th letter. Each one is different, but they all end the same way. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else hated me. He puts them in a box and gives it to the chaplain. If she ever wants them, give them to her, he says. The chaplain nods, but makes no promises. That night, in the yard, Adrian looks up at the sky and sees the moon above the walls. For a moment, it feels closer than he thought possible. One day, he receives an unexpected visitor. It's James Alcott. The guard opens the door, and Adrian is speechless. I didn't come here to humiliate you, James says. I came to fulfill a debt I owe your father. Adrian looks at him, confused. James continues. Your father and I worked together years ago. He was a just man, tough, but with honor. He believed a man could fall, as long as he knew how to get back up. I didn't come to save you. I came to remind you that you still can. Adrian doesn't know what to say. He just nods, and for the first time, he feels someone has looked at him without hatred. When James leaves, the silence returns, but this time it isn't so heavy. Adrian picks up his notebook and writes, Today, someone spoke to me without contempt. Maybe that, too, is a form of forgiveness. He puts the pen away, lies back, and closes his eyes. The murmur of the prison fades, the lights go out, and for the first time in a long time, he sleeps. In another part of the city, Valerie looks at the horizon from the window of Clara's haven. The wet rooftops reflect the moon. On the table, Adrian's letter rests beside the photo of her father. She thinks of all that was lost and all that is yet to be built. She lights a small candle and whispers, Thank you, Dad, for teaching me not to give up. The flame flickers, illuminating the paper, and she smiles. In the background, a clock strikes midnight. But for Valerie, it is the beginning of a new day. In that clean silence, the past no longer haunts her. It simply exists, without pain, like a shadow that has finally learned to stay still. Dawn arrives with a new clarity in New York. The winter is gone, and the city smells of warm bread and blooming magnolias. 6 months have passed since the trial, and Clara's haven has a different rhythm. On the walls, there are new photos, new voices, new women. Valerie is no longer just a resident. She now coordinates the center with a serenity that surprises even Clara. She arrives before anyone else each morning, opens the windows to let in the fresh air, and makes coffee for everyone. On the dining room table, over a checkered cloth, there are always fresh flowers. A home heals with the scent of life, she often says. The others nod, not knowing the phrase was born one night when she was still trembling from a memory. The center's expansion project has begun. It's called Beacon House, an idea from Valerie and James, a new space on the outskirts of the city with workshops for mothers, classrooms for children, and a small library. When James proposed she lead it, Valerie hesitated. I'm not a leader, she said. He smiled. You have been since the day you said enough. Since then, they work together every week. He provides the contacts and the funding. She provides the heart. They sometimes argue, but they always end up laughing. Between them, there are no promises or awkward silences, only respect and a bond born from shared pain. One morning, while reviewing documents, Valerie receives a letter. She recognizes the handwriting before opening it from the prison chaplain. Inside are several carefully folded pages. They are Adrian's letters, the ones he never dared to send. Clara walks in just as she is holding them. "From him?" she asks gently. Valerie nods. "Are you going to read them?" "I don't know," she replies. "Maybe, but not today." But that same night, when silence fills the building and the lights are out, she turns on a lamp and opens the first one. "Valerie," the letter begins. "I have learned to listen to what I once despised. Silence, guilt, waiting. Every day I write so that I never become the man I was again." She reads it all, without crying. Then she picks up another. "I don't expect you to forgive me," the second one says. "Only that one day, when you think of me, you don't feel fear." Valerie closes her eyes and takes a deep breath. There is no manipulation in these lines, only weariness. In the last letter, written in a shakier hand, Adrian confesses, "I have understood that my worst punishment is not this cell, but remembering the look of someone who still loved me while I was losing myself." She places the paper on the table and whispers, "I don't hate you anymore." For days, the letters remain on her desk. She neither hides them nor burns them. They are part of her story, but no longer her burden. In a meeting at the center, she tells the new women, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means stopping living inside the pain." One of them, a young woman with dark eyes, raises her hand. "What if I can't forgive?" Valerie smiles. "Then at least, start by not hating yourself." Clara watches her with pride. In the following weeks, Beacon House opens. Neighbors, volunteers, and local journalists attend. In her speech, Valerie doesn't mention her past, but everyone feels it there, invisible, shaping every word. "This place," she says at the end, "was not born from suffering, but from the will to turn it into something that serves others." The applause sounds sincere, and among the crowd, James looks at her with restrained emotion. After the event, they are left alone in the center's garden, among pots of lavender. "Your father would be proud," he says. She replies, "You would be too." "Oh," James shakes his head. "No, I was just passing by. You're the one who built this." That night, Valerie walks through the illuminated streets of New York with no particular destination. She enters a small cafe, orders a hot chocolate, and sits by the window. She watches people pass by, their laughter, their everyday gestures. For years, she had believed she would never feel part of the world again. Now, she understands that life doesn't wait, but it does forgive those who decide to keep walking. She takes a piece of paper from her bag and starts to write, not for anyone else, but for herself. "I have survived. And now I know that to live is not to conquer, but to learn to breathe without fear." Days later, she receives a call from the prison. Adrian has been transferred to a reintegration program. The chaplain asks if she wishes to send a reply. Valerie thinks for a moment and says, "Yes." That night, she writes a brief letter. "No punishment can give you back the past, and no forgiveness can erase the pain. But I wish you peace, because hate no longer belongs to me." She signs it without hesitation and sends it at dawn. As she does, she feels something inside her finally settle. Time moves on quietly. The center thrives. Women arrive from all over, some with children, others with invisible scars. In the courtyard hang strings of colored lights and the sound of laughter that resembles freedom. One afternoon, while watering the plants, Valerie is visited by a journalist. He wants to write an article about the project. "Could you tell your story?" he asks. She replies, "There is no single story of mine, only many stories of ours." As night falls, when everyone is asleep, Valerie sits by the window of her office. Outside, the moon illuminates the newly installed sign, "Beacon House, Center for Support and Hope." On the table, next to her notebook, rests Adrian's last letter. She hasn't opened it again, but she hasn't hidden it either. She looks at it for a moment, smiles with a new sense of peace, and murmurs, "Thank you for the lesson." Oh, Then she turns off the lamp, wraps herself in the warm silence of the place she has built, and thinks that perhaps forgiveness is not an ending, but a beginning spoken without a voice. In the street, the spring air carries the scent of blossoms, and New York, for the first time, feels like it's hers. The April sun falls on New Orleans with a golden glow that seems to bless everything. The city is alive with the Jazz and Heritage Festival, the balconies draped in colorful banners, the streets filled with laughter, music, and the smell of crawfish étouffée. Valerie returns after a year, her heart calm and her suitcase light. The train pulls into the station at noon, and the warm air hits her face like an old embrace. Her mother, Teresa, is waiting for her with a bouquet of jasmine and a smile that trembles on her lips. "My child," she says, "you look so beautiful." Valerie laughs. "More free, Mom." They hug without rushing, as if time doesn't exist. They walk through the familiar streets of the Garden District to the old White House. Everything is the same. The lemon tree in the courtyard, the slate roof, the scent of fresh bread from the corner bakery. In the dining room, there's bread, cheese, and olives. Teresa pours wine into 2 glasses. "A toast," she says. "To what?" Valerie asks. "To the miracles we didn't know we were waiting for." They laugh, and the clinking of their glasses fills the room with a tender, familiar sound. Valerie looks at her mother and understands that the fear that separated them for years no longer lives there. In the afternoon, they walk through the neighborhood together. Neighbors greet them, some with curiosity, others with affection. "The Hayes girl is back," they murmur. In a nearby park, children play baseball. A saxophone wails in the distance. Valerie stops by the river and watches the sky's reflection on the water. "I've changed," she says softly. Teresa nods. "Yes, but you're still you." Valerie smiles. "I don't want to forget what happened, Mom. I just don't want it to hurt anymore." "And it doesn't," she replies, her voice certain. That night, the house smells of jasmine and gumbo. Teresa cooks while Valerie reviews the plans for Beacon House. She's planning to open a branch in Louisiana. "You're bringing your project here?" her mother asks. "Yes. I want other women to have a place to start over." Teresa sighs with pride. "Your father would be so happy." Valerie looks up, and the name of her father no longer carries weight, only calm. An old blues song plays on the radio, and mother and daughter share a knowing look. The next morning, Valerie visits the cemetery. She brings white flowers and the same serenity she never had before. She kneels before her father's grave, wipes the dust from the marble, and whispers, "I kept your promise." The wind rustles the flowers as if the air itself is responding. Then, before leaving, she places a small envelope by the headstone. Inside is one of Adrian's letters, the shortest one, the one that says, "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else hated me." Valerie doesn't leave it out of pity, but as a symbol of closure. As she stands, she feels something invisible settle in her soul, like a door closing gently. That afternoon, James arrives from New York. He calls before appearing at the courtyard gate with a bottle of wine. "I couldn't miss the festival," he says, smiling. Teresa hugs him like a son. "Come in, the shrimp is fresh." Valerie looks at him with affection, with a mix of gratitude and peace that needs no words. "And Beacon House?" he asks, pouring a glass. "It's growing. Slowly, but surely," she replies, "like all things that matter." They sit in the courtyard among the bougainvillea, and the silence they share isn't awkward. It's the calm of those who have already survived the noise. As evening falls, they head to the festival. The fairgrounds are covered in lights. Music pulses from every stage. People dance in the streets. Valerie wears a simple white sundress. Teresa walks beside her, arm in arm with James. At one stage, a brass band plays a lively tune, and the air fills with applause. Valerie closes her eyes and lets the rhythm move through her. When she opens them, she sees her mother laughing, James raising his glass, and she feels an immense gratitude to be there. Alive, present. A local reporter approaches, recognizing her from the news coverage of the trial, but she raises a hand kindly. "Tonight, I'm not a story, I'm just part of the party." The man smiles and retreats. On the dance floor, Valerie is pulled into a Zydeco two-step. Her feet are clumsy at first, but she soon finds the beat. James watches from the side, clapping, and Teresa joins in, her voice adding to the music. Valerie's laughter mixes with the sound of the trumpets, with the scent of wine and night-blooming jasmine. When the music ends, the sky erupts in fireworks. The colors illuminate Valerie's face as she looks up, as if the past were igniting and dissolving in the air. James leans in and says, "You're proof that the light always comes back." She replies, "The light never left. I just learned how to see it again." They walk together along the riverbank. The Mississippi shines under the moon, calm and eternal. Before midnight, they return home. Teresa says goodnight with a kiss and goes to her room. Valerie stays in the courtyard alone, listening to the distant murmur of the festival. She lights a candle and places it on the table next to a vase of jasmine. The flame flickers, casting soft shadows on the whitewashed walls. "For all those who survived," she says softly, "and for those still searching for their voice." She closes her eyes, and for the first time since that night in New Orleans, her breath is completely serene. When the neighborhood clock strikes midnight, a warm breeze passes through the courtyard, making the leaves of the lemon tree dance. Valerie smiles. In the distance, the fireworks paint one last explosion of light, and in that instant, life feels new, clean, and possible. New Orleans sleeps under a jasmine-scented sky, and the echo of her laughter, mixed with the murmur of the river, seems to say that the pain has transformed into something deeper, into a luminous certainty. That always, even after the longest darkness, the light comes home.